Someone like you, who lacks proper upbringing, has no place meddling in the affairs of our esteemed family. Leave this place immediately." In that instant, I felt the strength drain from my body, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. The years I had spent serving my mother-in-law with dedication shattered like fragile glass. Heather looked down at me with an icy gaze. "Why are you so silent? Hurry up and leave. Or are you planning to stay here?" Seeing my trembling lips, Heather raised her voice even further. "Did you really think you, unaware of the Willis's family prestige, could remain part of this household? Such audacity shows your true nature." A sharp pain pierced deep within my chest. Tears, held back for so long, began to trickle down my cheeks. In the living room where relatives gathered for New Year's, I alone was cast aside, pushed to the fringes like an outsider. The cold touch of the floor painfully reminded me of how out of place I was. My husband averted his gaze, keeping his eyes fixed downward. Despite being my partner of 10 years, he felt like a stranger in that moment. "Furthermore, I cannot forgive you for deceiving my son into marrying you. Your actions are unforgivable, and this marriage is a glaring mismatch." Heather deliberately walked toward me with slow steps. Her eyes were filled with blatant disdain. The tense atmosphere was suffocating, and the relatives' cold stares felt like countless needles pricking my skin. If only I came from a more suitable background, I might not have faced this humiliation. However, the 10 years I dedicated to this family were not a lie. Trembling in the corner of the room, I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a document containing shocking truths. Heather opened the envelope, her expression unchanging, and read its contents. "My name is Chelsea Willis, and this is the story of how my life within the Willis family became suffocating. My first meeting with Heather, my mother-in-law, was marked by a cold and tense atmosphere. Still, I believed that as family, we would eventually find common ground and grow closer. However, these hopes were crushed as time went on. "Chelsea, what did you use for the soup this morning?" Heather's sharp gaze pierced through me during breakfast. I used celery." I answered cautiously, but Heather clicked her tongue in disapproval. "Celery, I suppose that's the flavor of your family, but in this household, we don't use such cheap broth. Poor Ryan, having to eat such subpar meals." My father-in-law, Lance, looked up from his newspaper with a grimace but said nothing. My husband, Ryan, remained silent as well. All I could do was bow my head and murmur an apology. Heather's criticisms didn't stop at my cooking. She would find fault in every aspect of my daily life. "Chelsea, is that skirt what you're planning to wear to work?" She addressed me while I was getting ready in the morning. "Yes, I thought this would be practical and comfortable." Heather let out a dramatic sigh as she glared at me. "Practical? That's just a sloppy excuse for being lazy. As the wife of a Willis, you need to dress more properly. Make sure you're presentable and not embarrassing to be seen with." What exactly did it mean to be the wife of a Willis? The more Heather talked about her proud lineage, the more dubious it seemed. Claims about being samurai retainers or having a grandfather who was a congressman sounded grand, but I doubted their validity. Regardless, Heather's words gave her no right to belittle me constantly. Even at home, I felt no peace under her watchful eyes. "Chelsea, you forgot to iron this shirt again. Women in the Willis family are never this careless. Did your family raise you with such disregard for basic manners?" Every time she mentioned my upbringing, it struck a nerve. My parents had passed away when I was young, and I was raised by distant relatives. Heather's words seemed to dismiss the warmth of a family I had never known. "I'm sorry. I'll fix it right away." "Don't just fix it right away. Do it properly from the start. You're a Willis wife. Act like it." It was about 6 months into my marriage when I finally told Ryan about Heather's behavior. "Ryan, can we talk about your mother?" He looked uncomfortable as soon as I brought it up. "Mom can be strict, but she doesn't mean any harm." "Doesn't mean any harm? What was that supposed to mean? What was I supposed to make of that?" Heather's treatment only escalated after that. She became particularly harsh about the fact that I hadn't yet had children. "Chelsea, why haven't you had children yet?" The Willis family has always been blessed with strong male heirs. Are you even trying?" The moment I heard her words, it felt like my heart froze. The truth was, Ryan was the one with fertility issues, a fact confirmed by the doctor. But there was no way I could reveal that to Heather. "I'm sorry, we're doing our best." That was all I could muster. Heather scoffed at my response. "Doing your best? Well, I won't hold my breath." Despite her cruel remarks, I endured it. I didn't want to jeopardize my relationship with Ryan. To me, family was something irreplaceable. Having grown up as an orphan in the care of relatives, I valued this family despite its challenges. But recently, I started to question Ryan's behavior. He was working late more often, coming home at odd hours. Our household finances were shrinking noticeably. These changes fed my growing sense of unease. Still, I tried to trust him. But the combination of Heather's relentless abuse and Ryan's indifference was slowly breaking something inside me. How much longer could I endure this? "Chelsea, are you listening?" Her voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned around slowly, forcing a strained smile, and nodded. "Yes, I'm listening." But deep down, something within me was already crumbling. Heather decided to organize a New Year's gathering to showcase the family lineage. She announced it during a conversation about Ryan's recent promotion. While Lance was talking about Ryan's new position, Heather interrupted with excitement. "It's important to remind everyone of the greatness of our family." That day, Heather instructed Ryan to invite all his paternal relatives. Not a single relative from Heather's side was invited. "Heather, won't you invite anyone from your side of the family?" She sighed dramatically, as if annoyed by the question. "My family lives far away, and they're not the type to appreciate gatherings like this." Her words felt laced with disdain. The day of the gathering arrived, and the house was filled with Ryan's extended family. Heather stood in the center of the main room, proudly displaying a family tree. "Our ancestors were loyal retainers of feudal lords. This family has a noble and storied history. As you can see, my grandfather was a congressman who contributed greatly to the development of this region." The family tree was filled with unfamiliar names. Heather meticulously described each person's achievements, emphasizing their importance. Yet something about her story didn't sit right with me. On the far right edge of the family tree, a surname caught my attention. It was the same as the family names of my childhood friends-in-laws. That family was from the same area Heather claimed to be her birthplace. As Heather continued her monologue, I couldn't shake the growing doubt in my mind. That night, I reached out to my friend. "Sorry for the sudden question, but isn't your husband's family name Willis?" "Yes. Why do you ask?" "It's about something my mother-in-law Heather mentioned. She's claiming a family lineage that seems very similar to your in-laws." I explained briefly about the family tree Heather displayed and her boastful claims. "Heather's story doesn't seem to match what I've heard about your husband's family." "That's strange. Let me check with my in-laws and get back to you." Meanwhile, Ryan's behavior became increasingly suspicious. He was quiet, distant, and often seemed on the verge of saying something, only to remain silent. "Is something wrong?" I would ask gently, but he'd always avert his gaze. "No, it's nothing." His phone rang more often, and he'd leave the room to take calls in private. He would return with a restless expression, further fueling my unease. Still, I wanted to trust him. Heather, however, continued her relentless criticism, which worsened as the New Year's gathering approached. "Chelsea, you must learn to behave in a manner befitting this distinguished family. Everything you do makes you stand out for the wrong reasons." Her words stung deeply. As I waited for my friend's response, time seemed to stretch unbearably long. A few days later, my friend called back. "Chelsea, I checked the family records. Heather's name isn't listed anywhere, and there's no mention of a congressman or feudal retainers in the records either." The moment I heard this, my suspicions solidified into certainty. Heather's proud family story was a fabrication. I asked my friend to send me copies of her family tree and registration documents to verify. Once I had those in hand, I could confront Heather with the truth. But how would I handle the fallout? As New Year's approached, Heather became even more insistent about preparing for the gathering. Chelsea, don't do anything to embarrass this family during the event. The best contribution you can make is to stay quietly in the corner. I spent sleepless nights, torn between frustration and sadness. Heather's words echoed in my mind, leaving me restless and unable to focus. Then, another question began to haunt me. What secrets was Ryan hiding on his phone? One night, as he slept, I found myself staring at his phone, contemplating whether to check it. I took a deep breath, feeling as though a crucial moment had arrived. Heather's lies and Ryan's secrets, I would uncover everything. The morning of the New Year's gathering, I sat alone at a small corner table in the kitchen. The air was filled with the festive aroma of traditional dishes, but I couldn't feel anything. In front of me, an array of colorful dishes was neatly arranged: black beans, chestnut paste, and kombu rolls. These were all proudly prepared by Heather. I held my chopsticks in my hand, but couldn't bring myself to eat a single bite. From the next room, Heather's laughter rang out. I could hear relatives chatting and laughing, and it was clear Heather was at the center of attention. Honestly, Chelsea is such a useless daughter-in-law. Her shrill voice pierced through the walls, and the words cut into me like a knife. She can't even manage basic household tasks properly. How embarrassing to have someone like her in our family. My hands trembled as I clenched the chopsticks. Heather's words echoed in my head, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. The voices from the next room continued. Just the other day, she burned one of the dishes for this New Year's meal. Can you believe that? The relatives chuckled awkwardly at her story, their discomfort palpable, even through the wall. A daughter-in-law who fails at everything she does. Ryan must have had terrible judgment to choose her. I slowly placed my chopsticks down and folded my trembling hands on my lap. The coldness of my fingers betrayed my struggle to suppress my emotions. Heather's voice grew sharper. Someone like her doesn't deserve to be part of this distinguished family. She should just leave my son. At that moment, something inside me snapped. My vision blurred as my anger and sorrow bubbled to the surface. I stood up slowly, reached into my bag, and pulled out the envelope containing the truth. My hands trembled as I held it, and I took a deep breath before stepping into the next room. Heather's face immediately soured when she saw me enter. What do you want now? The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. The lively chatter halted, replaced by a heavy tension. I walked to the center of the room, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. Slowly, I placed it on the table and took a step back. This is a letter from Ryan's mistress. My voice was steady, even as my hand shook. The room froze, and everyone stared at me in shock. I continued, unwavering. Inside is also a signed divorce agreement from Ryan. And one more thing, she's pregnant. Gasps and murmurs erupted from the relatives. Heather's face turned pale as she slammed her hand on the table. That's a lie. This is absurd. But her voice trembled with desperation. It's not a lie. You can ask Ryan yourself. My voice was cold as I stared directly at her. A relative finally broke the silence, their voice uncertain. If this is true, then this is a serious matter. Heather frantically tried to explain herself, her words tumbling out incoherently. Someone must have forged this. It's all lies. But the relatives' glances grew colder. Do you know why I brought this up today? I turned to Heather, meeting her eyes with a steady gaze. You've humiliated me over and over again. You've called me useless, unworthy, a disgrace. But I will not allow you to demean me any longer. My words felt like a declaration, not just to Heather, but to myself. The weight of her oppressive words lifted slightly from my shoulders as I spoke. Heather stood frozen, unable to respond. The room descended into an uneasy silence once more. From behind me, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor echoed. Turning around, I saw Lance, Heather's husband, rising slowly from his seat. His expression was grave, and his movements deliberate. Enough, Heather. His voice was low, calm, but carried undeniable authority. What are you saying, Lance? Her voice wavered, a hint of panic creeping in. Lance took a deep breath before turning to me.
Chelsea, I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. I've watched you suffer for far too long.
His words caught me off guard, and I widened my eyes slightly.
Heather, there's something I've kept hidden for years.
Heather stiffened, her eyes darting toward him.
What are you talking about?
Her voice carried a mix of suspicion and dread.
I have a child with another woman.
Gasps filled the room. Heather's face turned ashen, and she staggered backward.
That's a lie. It has to be. It's not. By your logic, my infidelity is justified if it's for the sake of protecting the family.
His words dripped with irony, and his piercing gaze didn't waver.
You're no better than me. How dare you criticize me? You've hurt Chelsea far worse than I ever could. You've shamed her in front of family, belittled her every move. Whatever faults I have, I won't stand by and let you continue this.
Heather's defiance crumbled under his stern gaze, and she slumped into her chair. I stepped forward, pulling another envelope from my bag. This is the proof of your lies, Heather. I placed the documents, the family tree and the registry records, on the table. Heather's face contorted as she realized what they were.
What is this?
This is the real history of the family you've been pretending to belong to. Heather's hand shook as she hesitantly reached for the papers. Her eyes darted across the pages, and her expression grew increasingly panicked. Your name isn't here. Your entire story is a fabrication. Heather's breath hitched, and she dropped the papers as if they burned her.
No, this can't be.
Her voice cracked, and for the first time, she looked genuinely broken. The room fell silent, the weight of the truth settling over everyone present. The room was suffocatingly quiet, save for Heather's shallow breaths as she stared at the damning papers on the table. Relatives exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock, disgust, and pity.
I've had enough, Heather.
His voice broke the silence, steady but heavy with disappointment.
Your lies, your arrogance, your constant need to tear others down. It's gone too far.
Lance, I only wanted to preserve our family's legacy. Her voice was barely above a whisper, the fight in her diminishing with every word.
At what cost? You've alienated Chelsea, disrespected her, and now humiliated yourself in front of everyone.
Heather opened her mouth to protest, but seemed to think better of it, her gaze falling to her lap. I stood there, watching the scene unfold, feeling both vindicated and hollow. This was the moment I had been waiting for, a chance to expose the truth, but it felt like a Pyrrhic victory. I endured so much for the sake of this family. My voice cracked as I spoke, tears welling up despite my best efforts to remain composed. But now, I see that my efforts were wasted. You never saw me as family, only as someone to control and demean. Heather's head shot up at my words, but she didn't reply. Her eyes darted toward the relatives, looking for some shred of support, but none came. Heather, we never imagined you would stoop so low. One of the older relatives finally spoke, her tone laced with disappointment. You owe Chelsea an apology. Heather's lips trembled, but no words came out. Lance sighed heavily and turned to me.
Chelsea, you've been treated unfairly, and for that, I deeply apologize.
I nodded, acknowledging his words, though they didn't erase the years of pain. Gathering my strength, I stepped toward the door, my decision final. This is the end for me. I'll no longer be a part of this household. Gasps rippled through the room as my words sank in.
Chelsea, wait.
Ryan, who had remained silent until now, scrambled to his feet, his face pale.
Don't leave. We can work this out.
I turned to face him, my expression hardened by years of disappointment. It's too late, Ryan. My voice was firm, though it wavered slightly with the weight of my emotions. I'd given everything to this family, and all I've received is ridicule and neglect. I deserve better. Ryan's shoulders slumped, and his face crumpled as he realized there was no convincing me to stay. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the family that had caused me so much pain. As I stepped outside, the crisp winter air filled my lungs, feeling both biting and freeing. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't just tears of sorrow, they were also tears of release. For the first time in years, I felt unshackled. I walked away from the house, each step feeling heavier yet lighter at the same time. The cold wind stung my cheeks, but it also carried a sense of liberation. This was the first step toward reclaiming my life. Over the next few days, I began the process of moving out and filing for divorce. Ryan tried to contact me several times, but I ignored his calls and messages. My focus was on rebuilding my life, free from the toxic environment I had endured for so long. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly smooth, likely because Ryan knew he had no grounds to fight. As for Heather, her fall from grace was swift and unrelenting. The relatives who once tolerated her behavior turned their backs on her, unable to forgive her deceit and cruelty. Lance eventually filed for his own divorce, citing years of emotional manipulation and dishonesty. Heather's facade of superiority crumbled, leaving her isolated and disgraced. Meanwhile, I began to rediscover myself. I moved into a modest apartment, started a new job, and began surrounding myself with people who valued me for who I was. Slowly but surely, I felt the weight of my past lifting. Months turned into a year, and I realized how much stronger I had become. I no longer defined my worth through the eyes of others, especially those who sought to tear me down. One day, out of the blue, I received a call from my old friend Mary. "Chelsea, how are you? I've been meaning to check in on you." "I'm doing well, Mary. Life has been peaceful." "I'm so glad to hear that. Listen, there's someone I'd like you to meet." "Someone to meet?" "Yes, I think you'll find this connection intriguing." Curious but cautious, I agreed to meet Mary's acquaintance. The meeting was set for a quiet cafe in the city. When I arrived, I was greeted by a man named Sean, whose calm demeanor and kind smile immediately put me at ease.
"It's a pleasure to meet you, Chelsea."
His voice was warm, and as we spoke, I felt an unexpected sense of comfort. Sean didn't boast about his background or achievements. Instead, he listened intently as I shared my story, offering thoughtful insights and genuine encouragement.
"You've been through so much, yet here you are, standing strong. That's admirable."
His words struck a chord, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly seen. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and before long, I found myself laughing and smiling more than I had in years. Over the following months, Sean and I grew closer, and I began to see a future filled with hope and possibility. He showed me that true strength comes from within, and that my worth was never tied to anyone else's approval. With Sean by my side, I felt ready to embrace a new chapter of my life. Together, we began to build a relationship based on mutual respect, trust, and love. A stark contrast to the life I had left behind. As I look back on my journey, I realized that every challenge I faced had shaped me into the person I was today. And for the first time, I was truly at peace.